Hello, guys. Buenos días, buenas tardes, buenas noches. Welcome to our 14th video of this series of online classes. We're so close to the end. Just hang in for a little bit more and the semester will be over. Today, we are going to go back to a topic that we already introduced a couple of videos ago, stem changing verbs, okay? But today we are going to discuss a different group of stem changing verbs. We had done the e to ie stem changing verbs, or e to ie. Today we are going to do the o to ue stem changing verbs, or if you prefer to pronounce that in English, the o to ue stem changing verbs. First, I'm going to remind you yet again of how we conjugate normal regular verbs like cantar, which means to sing. I hope you remember that. So how do we conjugate these regular verbs? First, we get rid of the ending, the last two letters. And by doing that, we obtain what is known as the stem of the verb, right? And so, in the case of cantar, the stem is cant. And then what we do is add the endings we have learned for each of the three types of regular verbs. How do we know which endings to add? Well, we know that from the ending of the infinitive that we just removed, right? We have endings for ar verbs or AR verbs. We have endings for verbs or ER verbs. And we have endings for id verbs or IR verbs, right? You should know those endings already. So after you remove the stem, you add the endings that you need depending on the type of verb that it is. So for cantar, I've added the ar endings, which are o, as, a, amos, an. And this is the result, right? Yo canto, tú cantas, él o ella canta, nosotros cantamos, ustedes cantan, ellos cantan. That is review of how we conjugate regular verbs, right? And if you look at the table, you will realize that the stem never changes. But we already learned that there are verbs in Spanish in which the stem actually does change, right? So today we're going to look at one of those groups. Remember then that stem changing verbs are verbs in which the stem changes, yes, but the changes are minor. And remember the very important rule that those changes always apply to all forms of the verb except the nosotros form, okay? The nosotros form is conjugated as if it were not a stem changing verb. Let's look at an O to UE stem changing verb, mover. I think you already know what this means because it's very, very similar to English. It means to move, right? So, how do we conjugate this stem changing verb? First thing we do is we remove the ending, right? Which means we obtain the stem of the verb. The stem of the verb is move. But I just told you that mover is an O to UE stem changing verb. What does that mean? It means that that O in the stem changes to a UE. Okay? So let's see the conjugation actually. This is it. Look at the first form that we find in this table, the yo form. If it were not a stem changing verb, the conjugation would be yo movo, right? Because mov is the stem of the verb and it is an verb, right? So we need the o for the yo form as an ending. So if this were not a stem changing verb, it would be yo movo. But it is an O to US stem changing verb, so we take that O and we replace it with UE. The actual form is yo muevo. And remember that in Spanish you pronounce the vowels very open and they have very specific sounds, right? So it's yo muevo. Yo muevo. Notice that the same change is happening everywhere, right? Mueves, mueve, but it's not happening with the nosotros form, because that is the rule. The nosotros form is the only one that is conjugated without a change for stem changing verbs. So for the nosotros form, we're using the stem without any changes, mov. For all the other forms, we're using the stem with the O to UE change. We're changing that O for an UE, right? In order to show this more clearly in the table, I have marked those changes with purple, right? Notice as well the endings that we're using here. O, es, e, hemos, en, en. Where did I get those endings? Well, they are your standard endings for verbs. Why did I use these endings? Because mover is an verb, as the ending of its infinitive tells me, right? We had already covered stem changing verbs before. I'm only introducing another group of stem changing verbs, but since some people struggled a little with that first group, I wanted to redo this explanation of how stem changing verbs work. Okay? So let's look at a couple more O to UE stem changing verbs. Oh, I'm sorry, this is a typo. These are not E to IE stem changing verbs, these are O to UE. Okay? I left that title from the last presentation. But the verbs are correct. Let's look at encontrar, right? Encontrar. That's an O to UE stem changing verb, like mover. It means to find. So look at how I conjugated it, right? That I first removed the two last letters, the AR, and I'm left with a stem that would be encontr, right? That stem has an O. Since this is an O to UE stem changing verb, I take that O and I change it for an UE. Everywhere but for the nosotros form. Everywhere except for the nosotros form. Right? And how did I get these endings? O, as, a, amos, an. Well, they are your standard ar endings, right? Because encontrar is an ar verb. Let's look at another example. Dormir, which means to sleep. It's a very important verb, at least in my opinion, right? Again, it's an O to UE stem changing verb, right? So I remove the ending, the two letters IR. I'm left with dorme. That stem has a no. It's a no to UE stem changing verb. So I change that O for UE everywhere, but for the nosotros form. So it goes duermo, duermes, duerme, dormimos, duermen, duermen. Right? It's not dormo, dormes, dorme because it's an O to UE stem changing verb. And where did I get those endings? They are your standard ir endings. O, es, e, imos, and en. Right? Dormir. It's an ir verb. Okay? So these are O to UE stem changing verbs. Let's look at a few of these. As always, since this is just a virtual semester and the pandemic surprised us, I'm not going to ask you to memorize this, but I give them to you for your benefit. And in case that someone is actually memorizing the vocab and learning it, uh, if you want to move on to 102, okay? So it's a very short list of O2UE stem changing verbs that are used a lot in the Spanish language. I'm going to pronounce them briefly. Almorzar means to have lunch. Contar means to count. Costar means to cost, as in um, the cost of things, right? Cuánto cuesta means how much does it cost. And in that question, cuánto cuesta, notice that I changed the O for an UE, right? It's not cuánto costa, it's cuánto cuesta. Dormir means to sleep. Encontrar means to find. Morder means to bite. Morir means to die. Mover, which we did, means to move. Probar means to taste or to try. Recordar means to remember. Soñar means to dream, and volar means to fly. All of these are O to UE stem changing verbs, which means that when you conjugate them everywhere but for the nosotros form, you change that O in the stem for UE. For the activity, you already know what I'm going to ask you to do. Take two verbs that I have not used in this presentation, so please don't use dormir, don't use encontrar, and don't use mover, but you have several other options in this list. Take two verbs and conjugate them. Draw me a little table like the ones I did in this presentation, and just write the correct forms of the verb for each of the pronouns, right? Okay. Um, as I said, the semester is almost over. Also, I believe I mentioned it in the last video, but um, I'm going to say it again. I think I'm not going to introduce any more topics during our last week of classes. I'm just going to do a few review videos and give you a few review activities. So we're very, very close to a moment in which you will not have to learn any new stuff in order to do your activities, okay? And some people have asked, even though I have mentioned it a couple of times, so again, given the peculiar nature of this semester, I am not doing a final exam, okay? The only exam that you have for this class is the midterm, and the rest of the grade is going to come from your attendance in the part of the semester that was face to face, of course, and from your activities in the part of the semester that was um, virtual, and of course the couple quizzes that we managed to do before the semester was moved online. Thank you guys. Stay strong. We're almost there. Hasta mañana.